I made a bunch of stuff, including 18 new models for my 3 factions, and then put them into my game, letting me change it from this into this. But that's not all, so welcome back to Cup of Tea, and it's time for another devlog. I had a thought. My game is going to be on every platform. What's it like on a different size screen? And the result wasn't pretty. When the aspect ratio changes, the camera's movement loses its tracking. For some reason, moving the mouse a lot only moves the camera a little, even though it's moving the same number of pixels that it would be on a bigger screen. Looking for solutions and drawing out a diagram, setting the camera to diagonal field of view mode helped it keep proportionality a little bit better. Next, I opened the entity handler and added some team information. I set up a system where each team has 4 colors, 2 for the main player and 2 for allies, where the allies' colors are slightly lighter to show that you're not in control of them. But since unit ownership hasn't been set up yet, all the units on your team will be the ally color instead of the main color. Next up was actually giving those units those colors, which required tagging different parts of the units with light or dark, and checking the parts of units spawning in to give them those colors. And there it is. I was working on an additional type of highlighting when the same bug from the beginning had returned to claim 2 hours of bug fixing. The same bug from the beginning that Roblox had claimed to fix, and the same bug from the beginning that people had already given their advice about. And yet now, despite that advice, it was still breaking the game. So I moved on. This is something that I would need some bug fixing inspiration for, so I started working on some GUI elements. And it's a pretty important one, but beside that, I also wanted to stylize the game a lot more. Starting things off, I found a darker sky background, which looks a lot nicer and it also contrasts with the map better. But I decided the aesthetic I'm going for is Cold War. It's something very broad with many interpretations, because there were many different art styles at the time. Tends to be very jazzy, sometimes colorful, and closely tied to action. But none of these did I really find GUI inspiration, so I kept looking until I found posters. Cold War propaganda posters. The art style is almost distinct, and I can even take inspiration from comic books at the time. The block colors, blocky font, sharp angles everywhere. And this is what I came up with. The next thing I worked on was the server replication. If you know one thing about Roblox, it's that having a lot of parts on the server lags everyone. My game only has data on the server, so it should always run smoothly. And there's very little data actually being sent to and from the server, because all I need to replicate is every time the player interacts with the world, like moving a unit. The only downside is that I have to set up this system manually, which I've already done from server to client for the map generation. I also fixed the highlight issue, don't ask how. Here it is. One person moves a unit, the other person sees it move. It looks pretty simple, but the code was only simple because I already planned to make it work this way. And then I did the same thing for units attacking. I spent a long time on an end turn button, the first button of the game. It needs to fit the art style, and a whole bunch of other things apparently. Because when I browsed the internet, buttons need to be this size, this shape, this color, different types of feedback. It's like you get a whole degree in buttonology. And so I found out these things. The button needs to be identifiable, so it needs to have features that buttons are commonly associated with, like being rectangular. It needs to be different from its surroundings so the user knows it's clickable. Secondly, its function should be clear. You should know exactly what a button's purpose is and what will happen when you press it. And third is feedback. You should know immediately that a button is working, not be waiting for hopes and dreams. I took a look at Polytopia and Advance Wars, games which I enjoy in the genre, to see what they did. Polytopia uses an extremely minimal interface. It's just a circle labeled end turn at the bottom of the screen with a white text in the vignette, so it will always contrast with the background. Advance Wars has this interaction menu with end turn at the bottom. The buttons do not distinctly look like a button, but it's clear that they are because they're inside the pop-up, which only has buttons. When the button is selected, it's highlighted, and pressing it immediately hides the UI and cuts the music to the next turn. Thinking it over, it led me to make a rectangle with rounded corners and a square pattern background. Squares symbolize completing your turn. It actually does everything that a button is supposed to. Just, I don't like it that much. I wanted to actually angle this, but Roblox didn't let me angle the canvas game object, and I realized that completing the game's art style the way it is would not be possible. So I just made a few tweaks. I removed the rounded corners, the shadow, straightened it out, and made it thinner. The button is no longer always visible, so I'll still probably put it on the side for mobile players, and instead opening right next to your mouse when you press the right mouse button. The last important mechanic is the actual turn structure, and I actually had an amazing revelation. It might be shocking, but people don't play games to not play. The biggest weakness of turn-based games is waiting for your turn. Except in big games with loads of players, you end up waiting more than 10 minutes maybe to play your own turn, and the time increases with increasing number of players. But what if it didn't? If I make the turns team by team, you'll only ever be waiting through one turn in a 2v2, or one turn in a 3v3, even though the number of players is increasing. To allow this, the turn structure has to be well defined so that the players can play at the same time. Were you expecting a cut to the time-lapse? Well, there actually isn't any, because my computer crashed and the footage corrupted. So I'll just explain how I set the rest of this up. I split it into 3 stages: the standby phase, the main phase, and the end phase. The standby phase and end phase are used for unit abilities, while the main phase is an open game state, where you can move your units, open your tech tree. When a player wants to end their turn, it waits for the entire team to proceed end phase, and then switch turn. I added this graphic to let the player know what's happening, and the transition between each turn. You might have noticed that I moved the camera again. That's because after I went and added all of the units in, I realized that the units not only look bad, but hard to distinguish as well from top down. With my new expertise, I bypassed all of the technical issues by adding 2 new camera parts. The new camera system has a pivot and a focus, allowing me to just move the focus without worrying about the camera. The final thing left to update was the selection box, which is just made of 2 GUI frames and a viewport frame, cloning new selections into it as they are chosen. And that covers everything in this update. My last video didn't do so well, but when I asked people, they said they didn't realize I uploaded it again. So if you're one of those, make sure to hit the notification bell. But even if you don't, I'll still be here. So thanks to everyone for your support. There's a link to the server in the description, and otherwise, I'll see you next time.